Go into the courtroom. Roy Black is on his feet.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. It's a real honor for me to be given this final opportunity to talk to you. And this is the only time I'm going to get to talk to you. When I tell you, it really is an honor to talk to you because in all due deference to everybody else in this courtroom, you ladies and gentlemen are the most important. Nobody has the important position that you people do. It is you people who stand between William Lozano and a great injustice. Every day, petty criminals, robbers and burglars and thieves and rapists come into this courtroom and get the benefit of the doubt and get justice. We now have to find out whether one of our police officers, a person wearing our uniform, our badge, out there not to commit crimes, but to represent and protect us, whether a man like that can get a fair trial and the benefit of the doubt in this courtroom today. At the beginning of this case, I talked to each one of you. We all had a conversation, and we made commitments to each other. Commitments that were serious and personal, from one to one, from heart to heart. That this case was not going to be decided on any kind of outside pressure. It's not going to be decided on some extraneous matter. That each one of you gave a personal commitment to decide this case on the evidence and not on other concerns. And each one of you have taken an oath to do just that. And we selected you. And this is a long process. This is very unusual for a case. I mean, we took a long time with each one of you. And you were selected on the basis of integrity, responsibility, commitment to your word, things that are important in life. It's those commitments that we call upon today. And I know each one of you have taken this seriously. Each one of you were serious when we questioned you. You've been serious throughout this case. We just ask that you stand by the commitment that you made to us. Commitment of one person to another. Some of the most important commitment you can make. I want to talk a little bit about the law. I know you've probably heard more than you want to know about it. But the law is important because we're governed by law. And in this case, there's one law that's more important than any other. There's one law that is so more important than any other instruction that it dwarfs them in importance. That's the law of reasonable doubt. That is the law that you apply to this case. The law of reasonable doubt. Every person who comes in this courtroom gets the benefit of the doubt, because that's the way that this works in these courtrooms. And this man is entitled to the benefit of the doubt. And what does that mean? And I have the instruction here to try to explain this as best I can to you. I know you're going to get the instructions when you go back into the jury room, but I want to point out certain words in this instruction. And I apologize, I know it's a little hard for some of you to crane around. The question, there's certain words in this instruction that to me are critical. After carefully considering and comparing and weighing all the evidence, there is not an abiding conviction of guilt, or having a conviction that's not stable, wavers and vacillates, the verdict is not guilty. There's two words in that I want, there's one word in particular that I want to point out to you. It's that word abiding. That's a powerful word. When we use abiding, we use it in such terms as an abiding faith in God. Abiding is a powerful word that we use here. That's how powerful that belief has to be. If you don't have that abiding conviction, the one that you hold so close as your other abiding convictions, And the verdict in this case has to be not guilty. There's no more important word than that word abiding. It's powerful, it's strong, it's pervasive. It goes throughout this entire case, through every instruction. Every instruction in this case must be read with this concept of abiding belief in guilt before you can return a verdict of guilty. If you don't have that abiding belief, that abiding conviction, then you can return no verdict other than not guilty. Because that's the law, not something I'm making up. Judge Spencer will confirm exactly what I say when he reads the instructions to you, when he gives them to you. He's going to confirm that word over and over again. That's how important that is. There is nothing more important in this case than that one instruction, that one definition of an abiding belief, an abiding conviction. And if you don't have that, the law says you can only return a verdict of not guilty. It is that strong. I also wanted to talk for a minute about what manslaughter means. Mr. Bagley read to you from the information that manslaughter is either 1, evincing an intent to kill, or 2, killing by culpable negligence. This is not negligence we're talking about. I just want to talk about this as a matter of law for a minute. This is not negligence. If that was the case, every doctor who made a mistake would go to prison. This is not negligence, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about. We're talking about a crime, criminal negligence. And look at the words, because the words are important here in this definition. It must be gross. It must be flagrant. It must be reckless. It has to be a reckless disregard of human life. Conscious indifference. Conscious indifference to the consequences in human life. Wantonness. Recklessness. Grossly careless. In utter disregard. These are the words that we're talking about, because we're talking about a crime here. We're not talking about mistakes. Gross and flagrant, reckless, conscious indifference, wantonness, recklessness, grossly careless, utter disregard for the safety of other people. There's one thing that I have to answer that Mr. Bagley brought out. That there were innocent people in the vicinity, and therefore that proves utter disregard for the safety of others. Well, ladies and gentlemen, when a police officer acts, there are always innocent people around. That's where police officers are. That's the circumstances under which they have to act. To come up here and now say there were innocent people nearby when a police officer is doing his duty is the worst kind of hypocrisy. And times happens when police take action, sometimes bystanders or innocent people are hurt. Look what happened out in Waco, Texas. They had children who were killed. Is Janet Reno responsible for that now?
Judge, I object. This was specifically excluded from pretrial.
Don't be misled by this idea that innocent people are nearby. When the police act, whether it's the FBI, the DEA, the local police, I don't care who it is, there are always innocent people nearby, because that's when you have to act. Police don't act in a vacuum. So don't be misled by his characterization saying because there are innocent people nearby that a police officer can't do his duty, he can't act, he can't protect himself, he loses the right of self-defense and becomes guilty of a crime. And Mr. Bagley says that you ought to use your common sense. And I agree with that. Common sense is important. But let's look at this case in terms of your common sense for a minute. Look what you have to believe. Number one, a police officer, a man who took this job to serve others, not who took a job to make a lot of money, not to take a job with a lot of prestige, not to take a job to be on television or be a star or a law enforcement officer like they claim they are. A man who took a job, a uniform and a badge to go out on the street to protect us. And here's this man, you hear him this day. What does he do? He goes to an apartment where people are having problems. There's family disputes. What does he do? Does he arrest people? Does he harass them? Does he mistreat them? Does he show some type of prejudice or bias? He acts politely, courteously, professionally. He tries to help them, tries to get them counseling. This is this man they want you to believe is wanton and reckless as he utter disregard of human life. He goes to this apartment trying to help this mother and daughter. And then as he leaves, a man comes up to him, a total stranger, who needs a police report. He could have said, "Don't bug me. Go down to the police station. You could spend a day doing that." What does he do? He not only says, "I'll try to help you," and takes him across the street and looks for the report. He can't even find the report. Does he say, "Okay, go down to the police station"? He goes into his trunk. He tries to find a report. To do what? To help this man. And he can't find it. Then what does he do? He even gets on his radio to try to get another police car to bring over this report. This is this man that they want you to believe, for no reason, walked out into the middle of the street and shot and killed somebody. This same man, for no reason, went out and killed somebody, apparently, according to them, just to kill somebody that day. Secondly, if this man was not threatened, if he did not feel that his life was in danger, do you believe that this man would have, for no reason, have killed somebody? That's their case that you have to accept. This man that you've seen, that you've heard about, what he did that day, what he was doing, that this man, for no reason, without any danger to himself, decided to kill somebody. Does that make common sense? Or does it make it a lot more sense that something happened to this man to require him to defend himself? This is the same man we're talking about. They also want you to believe that William Lozano knew this motorcycle is coming at 70 miles an hour, and he deliberately walks out in the middle of the street to put himself in the front of a motorcycle going 70 miles per hour. That's what they want you to believe. Does that make common sense, that he would walk out in the path of this motorcycle? Was he there to hurt people? Was he there to cause trouble? Was he there because he was prejudiced in some way? Was he on that scene because he's an evil man? Was he there because he wanted to kill people? I don't think that's the case. That's not the case at all. That's not William Lozano, not the William Lozano that you heard those people testify. This man did not, without any reason, just walk out on that street to shoot and kill somebody. And they want you to believe that he shot him because he was speeding. Does that really make sense to you, ladies and gentlemen? That this man you heard about would go out in that street and shoot and kill somebody because he was going 50 miles an hour? Police officers, just like soldiers, are the last ones who want confrontation. Who are the people who get hurt in confrontations? The police officers are the ones in this country who get hurt. There's one killed every 57 hours. You think they go out wanting to get killed? Wanting to get assaulted? Wanting to get hurt? Wanting to go to the emergency room? Police officers, or you heard police officers testify, they're not out there, they're looking out for their own lives. They're not out there looking for confrontations. Just like the soldier. The last person who wants a war is a soldier, because he knows, or she knows, they're the ones who are going to get killed. Police officers are the same way. He's not out there looking for a confrontation. He's not out there looking to get hurt, to get run over. Is his conduct consistent with wantonness, recklessness, utter disregard of people, helping people get counseling, doing everything he can to help Mr. Johnson get a report for no reason other than just to help him? And what happens after the shooting? Who is the one? You know, they mentioned about Eddie Johnson being there. You know why he was there? Because William Lozano asked him to stay there. And he asked his supervisor and told his supervisor Eddie Johnson was here. Is this a man who's covering up for a crime? Who tells Mr. Johnson to stay there, tells Sergeant Stonebreaker that this man's a witness, and takes him over to him to interview him? How did they get to interview Eddie Johnson? Because William Lozano told them. This is wantonness, recklessness, this is a cover-up. And I wanted to play for you, Mark, could you play the tape? I want to play for you this tape, his radio broadcast that you heard. This is right after the shooting, within seconds. I want you to listen. And listen, I know that the acoustics are not good here. Listen to this man's voice. Okay, Mark.
3744 is trying to stop a motorcycle, red, white, and blue, black male driver, 1805.
41 was involved in a 317, starting on the fatal.
Kiss of the unit advisor, rest of 317.
3744.
QTH.
Every avenue, you better get to special.
241, are you trying to raise me?
I was involved in a motorcycle also, I just showed my firearm,
I can't read your Q estimate, QRL.
Send me the special, and also send a homicide, and also send a supervisor. Listen to the firearm, discharge the firearm.
QSL, your QTH.
Call 660 Central Avenue.
Did you hear his voice there? Listen to that voice. You go back in the jury room, you can play that tape. Listen to this man's voice when you get back there. Listen to the undertones of that voice. And you see if what this man was going through, what he had gone through. And you heard what the other officers had said about him. When Officer Mervolian went there, it looked like he had been through a terrible experience. He was pale, shaken. He looked like he was in shock. Meir said he was walking around in circles, talking to himself in a combination of English and Spanish. This man was extremely shook up. They ended up taking him to the hospital. On the way back to the police station, this man, they want you to believe, is wanton, reckless. Wantonness, they had to stop the car because he had to get out and throw up. This is the man they want you to believe is wanton, is a criminal, and for no reason, walked out into the street and killed somebody he didn't even know. never saw this man before in his life, and just killed him for no reason. No, they are going to argue here for hours today. Hours. There's going to be an endless replay of what happened that evening over and over again. The 2 weeks we've been here has been an endless replay over and over again, like armchair quarterbacks. You would think this is instant replay in the NFL. But William Lozano didn't have that, ladies and gentlemen. He had seconds, half a second, 1 second. He didn't have prosecutors there to help him out. He didn't have expert witnesses to give him advice. He didn't have all the opinions of the judge, of the prosecutors, everybody in the world. He was out there in that street, and he had to make a decision when his life was on the line. You know, it's easy to get up here in this air-conditioned courtroom and say, well, he could have done this, he could have done that. I'll tell you, it's a lot different when you're out there in that street, when you're out there protecting the citizens and people are assaulting you. You know, who's the only people who deal in the criminal justice system that deal with violent people? It's the police officers, like William Lozano. You think these prosecutors deal with violent people? When the criminals come into this courtroom, they're all wearing suits, they're nice, they're polite. When the counselors deal with them, when the judges deal with them, the probation officers deal with them, in prison. The only people who get out there and deal with people when they're violent, when they're crazy, when they're deranged, when they want to assault people, is that police officer. That's the only person in the criminal justice system that has to deal with violent people. And there are people in this world who for no reason want to hurt police officers. They see that uniform and that badge as a target. There are people in this life that can think of nothing better than to assault, to kill, to injure police officers. And don't think for a minute that does not occur on the streets of every large city in this country and in Miami. They have the luxury of time. They can stand up here and dissect every action. They can analyze everything in nice slow motion in this air-conditioned, carpeted courtroom. But it's a lot different when you're out there on that street. When you're out there on that street, when your life is on the line, when your adrenaline is going, when you have a tight ball of nervous energy in your stomach, when your heart is beating, you're breathing hard, you're doing what you can to survive, that's a lot different than coming in here and telling jurors 4 years later, well, this man should have waited another 1/10 of a second. It's like when you're going down the street, you're driving a car. A child darts out from between that car, between two cars into the street. What do? Do you say, well, let me think for a minute. I have to put on the brake. It's a little wet on the street. I might skid. There's some cars over here. I've got to watch out for people over there. No! You slam your foot on the brake. Because that's what you do in the incident. Sure, 4 years later, Mr. Hogan may come in and say, well, you should have known that it was wet on that street. You should have been able to see those cars over there. You should have worried about people driving in the other lane. But you don't know what it's like until you get out there in that car, until you put your hands on that wheel, until you see that child come out, until you hear and feel your body with that electric shock through it, with your heart beating and your breath pounding. And when you have to take action. That's why when you deal with the law says people are entitled to be thought of in the situation they were in. Not in this kind of a courtroom where it's nice and air-conditioned and we're all very polite to each other and we can debate these issues and we can get advice from every expert in the world that they can hire. But William Lozano didn't have that out on that street. Police officers don't have those experts walking with him on the beat. Ladies and gentlemen, Destruction of the physical evidence in this case gives rise to a reasonable doubt, which requires a verdict of not guilty. Let me show you from the instruction. A reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant. I'm sorry that this is, I know, some of your way. Arises from the evidence, conflict in the evidence, we'll get to conflict, and the lack of evidence. One of those things the law says reasonable doubt can arise from is the lack of evidence. And I want to talk to you a minute about the destruction of the physical evidence in this case. Police departments have an incredibly sophisticated group of men and women who run laboratories to examine evidence. You've heard some of the testimony here, the things that are available, the kind of things they can do about collecting, identifying, cataloging, and using evidence, because evidence is crucial. In any case, being able to find the evidence, to take the jigsaw puzzle and put it back together again, to be able to determine what happened, is crucial.
We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be back with more of Roy Black's closing argument to this jury right after these messages.
Ability of people, but scientifically, it's lost and gone forever. Oh no, we have the casing, but it's meaningless the way it is, because we don't know where it was found. Because it was impossible, and I don't blame this on the police officers and technicians of the City of Miami Police Department. These people were heroes. You watched that tape. How many of us would have stayed there while that was going on? These men and women are heroes. Ralph Garcia is still collecting evidence with rocks and bottles hitting him. You heard them saying there may be snipers on the roof. And these dedicated men and women are down there on their hands and knees looking for evidence. While cars are afire, shots in the distance, they're worried about snipers on the roof. They did everything they could. But in 1 hour, you can't find any evidence between 16th Street and 16th Terrace. It would take days to do that. But I don't blame these men and women for one bit. What they did was incredible. There was no systematic, careful search for the evidence. There was no way to reconstruct how the accident occurred up there. Detective Rochelle told you. He went out there and saw this one scuff mark. He estimates it to be a foot. Estimates it. We're going to estimate people into the penitentiary now? Guesstimates. Estimates. That's what this case is all about. We don't guess people into the penitentiary. We don't estimate them into the penitentiary. The average common criminal, if they had a case like this, if they didn't measure that skid mark, if they didn't look for other scuff marks, they'd throw the case out. But no, this is a police officer involved. It's somewhat different. So on that evidence, that little slim thing where he's estimating, guessing the length, they come up with an opinion. An opinion that turns a criminal into a victim, an opinion that turns a police officer into a criminal. But all that evidence is destroyed. George Rochelle did whatever he could at risk to his own life. He got hit by rocks and bottles, and he's out there still measuring in this hail of materials coming down on his head. My God, this man, you have to give him all the credit in the world. For what? The munificent salary that we paid them? They go out there in the midst of this, worried about their own life, and he's still measuring? Could you imagine any of us going out there in that street that evening with rocks and bottles, gunfire in the distance, worried about snipers on the roof, cars on fire, and he's down there trying to measure from a curb to a tire? That's what being a police officer means. But no, because it's incomplete, misleading, that's enough for them, but it's not enough for the truth. Any evidence to locate where that motorcycle went by scientific evidence, where that motorcycle was in that road, by evidence that doesn't lie, by evidence that's critical, by the evidence that's credible, it was all destroyed. The crowds could not be held back. Rocks and bottles are raining down. The place was absolute chaos. It's destroyed. Lost and gone forever. Politicians come down there. Because this was no longer William Lozano here. He no longer even owns his own name. It's some image now. It's something more than this case. And it became more than this case. The mayor comes down and lets people, the crowd, into the scene where this is happening to let them look at the bodies, where the evidence is trying to be gathered. Could you imagine what it would be like sitting on that chair over there and hearing that the politicians could come down and cause the destruction of all the scientific evidence that could prove your innocence? What kind of an investigation? What kind of a case? What kind of a prosecution? What is this that we're running here? Politics has been involved in this case right from the beginning, right to now. But that politics destroyed that evidence that night. Is that something we can stomach in this country? They had to abandon the scene. You heard those police officers. They stayed there as long as they could. They tried to gather what evidence they could at risk to their own lives. But they finally had to give up. They finally had to retreat. The mob took over that whole scene and destroyed it forever. And what we have are some bits and pieces. They'll put together what their opinions and say that this man is guilty. Destroyed his right to a defense. And don't think that scientific evidence is not important. One fingerprint is stronger than 10 alibi witnesses. DNA will prove more in a rape case than 100 witnesses saying it didn't happen. In a hit and run, one paint scrape from one car to another is more proof than all the testimony in the world. Don't think for a minute. Don't let them try to convince you that this scientific evidence is not critical, because it is. Let me give you an example in this case. Thank God we have a medical examiner like Joseph Davis. You heard his credentials, a man who has been head of the medical examiner's office in Miami since the late 50s, world-renowned. He, at least, was able to examine the body. Sandra Stewart comes in here and says that William Lozano that night shot this man twice in the back. That was her statement. Thank God we have Joe Davis, who went and examined it and said anybody who testifies this man was shot from the back is a liar. That's what scientific evidence does. Because it can disprove people when they come in and say things like that. Now, we'll get to a minute how they turn these two shots in the back into something else because they don't like it too much. But there's proof that that's absolutely untrue, that that could not be true, that it never happened. That's what scientific evidence can do for you. George Rochelle said he has investigated 13,000 accidents in his career as a traffic accident specialist with the City of Miami Police Department. 13,000. He said he couldn't measure the scuff mark. He had to guess at it. He couldn't see if there were other tire marks, other scuff marks. He said the roadway was strewn with things he couldn't pick up. He said it would have taken many hours or days to investigate. He did a very basic, a very minimal examination. He was more worried about surviving than he was about picking up evidence. He said the motorcycle ended up in the southbound lane. That's the best evidence and consistent with the motorcycle going up the southbound lane. But he can't tell us that with scientific evidence. Dr. Fogarty, I agree, is a very impressive witness, a professor. He did his best to determine the speed of this motorcycle, but his analysis is flawed. If you have incomplete data, you're going to have an incomplete conclusion. If you don't have the facts to put into the equation, the answer at the end of the equation is not going to be accurate. If Dr. Fogarty is correct, Mr. Lloyd was fleeing from the police at 50 miles an hour. If Mr. Fogarty is correct, after Mr. Lloyd went under the underpass, he had to totally cut off his throttle and coast. And coast, if he started coasting under the overpass, he would be doing 50 when he passed Officer Lozano and 40 when he has the accident. Have you ever heard of anybody in a police chase coasting their motorcycle? If we accepted Dr. Fogarty's conclusions, Officer Mervolian would have caught Lloyd and we wouldn't be here today. We have a chart that we did on the speed to try to find out what speed this motorcycle was going at. And let me move it over because I know it's a little hard for everyone to see. We had the witnesses identify what the speed was. John Mervolian, this is a man who's been a police officer for over 12 years. He's in a 1988, now this is only 1989, this is a 1988 Dodge Diplomat. I'm sorry, please raise your hand if this is reflecting off of, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. If he's got his pedal to the floor, going full power, and this motorcycle leaves him in the dust, like he was going in reverse. You really believe that the motorcycle was going 50 miles an hour, fleeing from Officer Mervolian? All the other witnesses. Officer Carr sees it, it's going 60 to 65. All the other witnesses have it 65 to 70. Mervolian says it's going easily 70 and probably in excess of 70 miles per hour. Now, Mr. Lloyd was under the influence of drugs at this time. We know that he used cocaine within 1 to 3 hours prior to his death. We know it's closer to 1 hour because of the way the cocaine was found in his blood system. Cocaine was found in his brain. The cocaine found in his nose, according to the state's expert, is consistent with him smoking crack cocaine. He had drinks in him, an extremely high level of marijuana, taken within 15 minutes to 1 hour prior to his death. It's a well-accepted fact that people who use things like crack and cocaine, when they come down from that high, they need something to supplement the bad feelings they have. They take things like marijuana and alcohol to do that. The prosecutors will have you believe that for some reason these drugs are going to make Mr. Lloyd mellow. Well, look at his conduct, what he was doing. The question is, was he mellow or was he paranoid? He's going at least 70 miles per hour. He's fleeing a police officer. He's driving incredibly recklessly, endangering people in the street, going through stop signs at 35, 40 miles an hour, up to 70 miles per hour, going through intersections at 70 miles per hour in the wrong lane of traffic. Just use your common sense. Think about, was this man mellow? Was he relaxed? Or was this man aggressive and violent? Officer Mervolian, I think, tells us the answer to that. He's driving down Northwest 2nd Avenue. This is a street that's 1 block east of 3rd Avenue. And I know it's confusing with the streets there, and I don't know how important it really is where that street actually is. But it's a back street, no sidewalks, large buildings abutting right on the street, cars in the street, people in the street. He's going 10 miles an hour through here. This motorcycle roars up behind him at high speed, through stop signs, through groups of people, and around. Now, as I remember the testimony on redirect examination, Mr. Hogan made a big point about how well Mr. Lloyd could maneuver that cycle. Because I had asked him about swooping around that car. Mr. Hogan said, well, he was pretty good, wasn't he? He really went smoothly through the gears. He could really maneuver that. And then, of course, they're a little unhappy with that later in the case. They call Mr. Hutchinson and now claim it's no longer maneuverable. I don't think they can have it both ways. But he goes around Officer Mervolian. He puts on the lights. Now, we all know police officers wear uniforms in the street, so we all know who they are. They wear badges. They wear the insignia of their office. Their cars are set out in such a way so we all know who they are. It's no mistake that this man is a police officer. Puts on a siren, puts on the lights, puts even the headlights of his car. And what happens? Mr. Blanchard leans forward. Mr. Lloyd leans back. We know there's a conversation. Mr. Blanchard turns around, gives the finger to Officer Mervolian, and then Officer Mervolian said he took the rails of the seat right here and held on tight and then tucked his head in underneath Lloyd, and I knew they were going to run. Why would they run? Ask yourself that question. Why were they running from this police officer only over a traffic ticket? It's a man who's high on drugs. He's got drugs on him. He's got $1,500 in small bills. And he's fleeing from the police in Overtown, which is infested with drug dealers, in the city of Miami, which has the worst drug problem in the United States. Just ask yourself what these men were doing on that motorcycle that day, and why, and whether their actions were desperate. Officer Mervolian said these people were acting strangely, they were a danger, they were totally reckless, they're going up 3rd Avenue at speeds in excess of 70 miles per hour, went through 3 gear changes. And those gear changes are important, I think, because you heard from Hutchinson that in order to speed shift these cycles, you've got to have high RPMs. That's high speed. You don't shift into 3rd gear at 25 miles an hour, as they think, because it wouldn't work. You've got to be going at high speed to go through those upshifts up that avenue. And he could hear in the distance this motorcycle going through 3 upshifts. It wasn't slowing down. It wasn't coasting, as they would have you believe. He wasn't pulling over. He wasn't stopping. He was accelerating hard in upshifts up 3rd Avenue. The court is going to give you certain instructions about the witnesses. And I just wanted to spend a minute going over this with you, because to me this is one of the real critical parts of the case. And Judge Spencer is going to be reading this to you and giving you a copy of it. But I wanted to set it out here so you could see how this operates. There are ways of determining whether or not witnesses are truthful. There may be more than this, but this is what the law sets out as things that you ought to consider as to whether or not witnesses are truthful and whether or not their testimony is proof beyond a reasonable doubt that a person has committed a crime. First, did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which the witness testified? Let me give you an example of that. I put yes here for Eddie Johnson because he's standing on the sidewalk. But I think if you remember what Mr. Johnson said, not here when he testified, but when he went down to give his statement at the police department. And by the way, the prosecutors were present when these statements were taken. At that time, he said, from my angle on the curb, I couldn't tell if this motorcycle was heading towards the police officer because I was at an angle. And we know that, ladies and gentlemen. You know, if you're in the middle of the street and you're looking down, you can see directionality. But when you're off to the side, how do you see directionality? Take, for example, Hilda McPhee. Hilda McPhee is back in the courtyard of the building, sitting on the bumper of her car, way off the street, not looking down the street, looking across the street. She has to look across the street through the cars in the parking lot, through the people that are there, through a double wrought iron gate, past the Dempsey dumpster that's there, past the tree, past the cars parked on the street, to see what's happening in that street, where she is directly east of it, looking at it at an angle. Not only that, but we know from Fogarty's testimony, Dr. Fogarty's testimony, how fast, how many feet per second this cycle would be going. The front of this building, I don't know exactly how many feet is across from one wing to another, but that cycle went from one side of that building to the other in somewhere less than a second. So someone like Hilda McPhee is looking from deep in the courtyard into the setting sun, of all things, across the cars, through the trees, through the double wrought iron gate, to see an event that happens in a second or less. And they now claim 4.5 years later she could tell where that motorcycle was on that street. When Eddie Johnson, when he gave the sworn statement standing on the curb, said, because of the angle, you can't tell the direction of that motorcycle. That's what this talks about when it says, did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which the witness testified? You use your own judgment on this. Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? You know, some witnesses, I granted, when Mr. Bagley and Mr. Hogan asked them questions, they remembered everything. When I got up there and asked them questions, it was a different story. Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? Does the witness's testimony agree with the testimony, the other testimony and other evidence in the case? You know, number 5 is crucial here. Does the testimony agree with the other testimony and with the other evidence in the case? The reason it's crucial is when you take a look at the reasonable doubt instruction. It says a conflict in the evidence gives rise to reasonable doubt. We're back to reasonable doubt again. These instructions are important, not just standing alone, but they interact with each other. So when you have witnesses where their testimony does not agree with each other, this gives rise to reasonable doubt because of the conflict in the evidence. Has the witness been offered or received any money or favored treatment? Has there been any pressure applied? Any intimidation? One thing I wanted to mention, Hilda McPhee says when I asked her here, I asked her how many times did you meet with the prosecutors, and of course they all said the same answer. I think Sandra Stewart said a couple of times, and everybody else said several times. No number. In 1990, Hilda McPhee said, as of that time, 3 years ago, she had met with the prosecutors 20 to 30 times. I hate to ask you, what are you talking about for 20 or 30 times? How many times do you have to tell them what you saw? Does it take 20 or 30 times to go over that? What went on in those 20 or 30 times? Why would they be any different? And that's 3 years ago. And what about someone like Sandra Stewart, who says a couple of times? You really think that Hilda McPhee went there 20 to 30 times in 1990 and the rest of these people didn't? And why didn't anybody correct that testimony? Has it been proved? Excuse me. Did the witness at some other time make a statement that's inconsistent with the testimony he gave in court? Well, I'm going to go through the witnesses, and we're going to talk about what's important and what's not important. Well, if you have somebody who says within hours after it happened, the person was shot twice in the back, and then comes in here and said, no, he was shot one time in a different angle, is that unimportant? Was it proved that the witness had been convicted of a crime? I don't know what the story is with Mr. Fountain. Mr. Bagley tells you today that he was out there selling guns. Well, as I recall, that was not what he testified to, and of course it was only his testimony. He was arrested carrying concealed firearms, one in his waistband and one somewhere else. His defense was that he was out selling the guns. I'm going to go through some of this testimony with you. I know now it's about 12:15, and this would be a good time for the court. I know the jurors have been sitting here a long time.
That'll be fine.
All right.
Be recessed until 1:45.
In his summation for the defense.
College professor. On any occasion, the officer would risk his life to protect the worldly goods of the rich, while at the same time being content with a salary that precluded his having many worldly goods of his own. August Vollmer, who was a famous chief of police in California, also dramatized the high expectations that society has of policemen. He said that we expect policemen to have the wisdom of Solomon, the courage of David, the patience of Job, the leadership of Moses, the kindness of the Good Samaritan, the strategy of Alexander, the faith of Daniel, the diplomacy of Lincoln, the tolerance of the carpenter of Nazareth, and finally an intimate knowledge of every branch of the natural, biological, and social sciences. Well, that's just not so. But we have these kind of expectations, and they play on it here. William Lozano was just a man out doing a job, doing his duty. He did not have the strength and agility of an Olympic athlete. He was not a ballerina. He was not a judge. He was not any of these things. He was just a man trying to do his best under difficult, if not impossible, circumstances. And you have to look at him as a man, not as something superhuman, not being able to do things that we can't do, because that's only in the movies. That's only on television. That's not in real life. And you can't hold him to some standard that doesn't exist. That's a fiction. He's in the trunk, talking on his radio, and yet they expect him to know what's happening 2 blocks south of him because it's a noisy motorcycle. And what does he do? What does this police officer do when something's brought to his attention? Police officers are supposed to investigate. They're supposed to do things. When something suspicious happens, they're supposed to look at it, not hide under their car, not say to Mr. Johnson, well, I'm going to hide here because it's dangerous. Why don't you go take a look and tell me what's happening? Police officers have to look at things. Look at Officer Carr. A car goes by with a questionable tag. He goes after it because that's their job. There's a broken window. They investigate. Shots. They investigate. Screams. Anything that's suspicious, different, not ordinary, the police officer has to go investigate. When William Lozano hears something being said by Mr. Johnson, his attention is directed down the street, sees the police lights of the car, he has to do something. That's what police officers do. And the first thing a police officer does is look. Take a look. Try to find out what's happening. It could be drug dealers running down the street. It could be any one of a number of things. But he has to look. When he goes out there, he doesn't know that there's a man stoned on intoxicants, driving a motorcycle crazily through the streets of Overtown at speeds in excess of 70 miles per hour. He doesn't know that. Mr. Johnson was asked on direct examination. That's when the prosecutors first get to talk to him. Why did you duck? And he said, well, I don't know why. Well, on cross-examination, I asked him about that because it was a prior statement that he had given. What he had said before, which I think speaks more than the testimony that you've heard here, his nonverbal conduct of ducking means a lot more than what he said. Why did he duck? Because when he saw that motorcycle and that police officer in the same frame, he thought it was going to be a collision. That's the only reason he would duck. He got down behind that police car because he knew it was going to be a collision in that street right in front of him. That action speaks far more eloquently than what he had to say on the witness stand. There was no danger to Eddie Johnson if that motorcycle was across the street. If it was 15 or 20 feet from William Lozano, there was no danger to Eddie Johnson. There was only a danger if that motorcycle hit William, and something happened because of that. And he admitted that at an earlier time. He testified that the motorcycle was 8 to 10 feet from William when he ducked. 8 to 10 feet. If you take a look, if I remember correctly what the statistics were, I know I have them later in my notes, but 8 to 10 feet is about 1/10 of a second away. I want to talk about Sandra Stewart, who was the next witness who testified. I think we have to question the way that she was examined. When she got on the stand, she was asked a question about how many times did William Lozano shoot? I saw one, but heard two. And now, here in this courtroom, this witness, who in January 17, 1989, in a sworn statement, within hours after this, said this police officer shot this man twice in the back. Twice in the back. Because it's so important to send this man to the penitentiary, one of those shots now becomes an echo. From a sworn statement, shot twice in the back, it now becomes an echo. How far are they willing to go to explain this away? Can you just imagine this? A witness gives a sworn statement that someone is shot in the back twice. Number one, well, now one of them is an echo, and number two, it's no longer in the back. She even demonstrated in the statement, using hand claps, how the shots occurred. Now what happens? It's no longer in the back, it's even with him. I wonder how that motorcycle got moved backwards over the last couple of years. We know from the medical examiner's testimony that both their stories can't be right. He certainly wasn't shot in the back, and he wasn't shot from the side as the way she demonstrated here. She put a little pen or a ruler, I can't remember which, and matched them all up. I just can't believe that things in this case have gotten so bad that someone who says he shot him twice in the back, it turns into an echo, and now they moved the motorcycle back to try to fit it into the facts of their case. I don't know of any case where a witness would make a statement like that, and then the testimony would change as dramatically as it is here, and the prosecutors get up and tell you that you can send a man to the penitentiary on that testimony. I'd never heard of any such a situation before. She says that William Lozano, at least now she says, was facing directly towards her building when he fired. We know from Dr. Davis that that's not possible. She said, and Mr. Bagley re-echoed here today, she never discussed the case with anyone. I think almost all the eyewitnesses said they never discussed the case with anyone. Yet isn't it amazing that they know all the details? They know that the police officers went to Martha Green's apartment because there was a runaway girl whose mother came over to pick her up, and they called the police and they're coming to make a report. They know that Eddie Johnson is out there getting a tag, a decal or something from his tag that was stolen from his car. Everybody knows all those details, yet nobody's ever talked about this case. She says that Officer Campbell, who was William Lozano's partner that day, first, in one statement, she says, before the shooting, Officer Campbell got in and was sitting in the passenger seat of the car at the shooting. Now, she says, it's after the shooting. Officer Campbell gets in, sits in the car, gets on the radio, and makes a report. Now, we know that that's not true. We have the tape and evidence from the dispatcher. There's no communication from Officer Campbell. She testified that William Lozano closed the trunk, took his radio, put it on top of the trunk, and walks out into the street. We know that's not true because we can hear William Lozano on his radio. He put the radio on his belt, and when he started going down the 16th Terrace, he pulls out his radio and communicates with the dispatcher. We have absolute evidence that all of that story there is false. So, we have number one, the angle of the shooting. Both descriptions she gave is impossible. Two, it certainly wasn't two shots. Three, he wasn't shot in the back. 4, Officer Campbell was not on the radio. 5, Officer Lozano had to have the radio with him in order to make that communication. And 6, she said there was no police car chasing the motorcycle. What the law says is that if there's a conflict in the evidence, if there's some conflict between what the witness says and what you know to be true, or what has been established as truth in the evidence, then that, ladies and gentlemen, is reasonable doubt. In deciding whether or not a witness is telling the truth, you look at things, did the witness have an accurate memory? Well, Sandra Stewart apparently doesn't. She keeps changing her story. Was she honest and straightforward in answering the questions? Does it agree with the other testimony in the case? Hardly. Has a witness at some time given a statement that's inconsistent with the testimony he gave in court? Could there be anything more inconsistent than that? I mean, is this some minor detail we're talking about? I mean, what is there about this case? How can you take a person who says something like that and turn them into a credible witness? You take Sandra Stewart from shot in the back. You take Hilda McPhee, well, I'll discuss in a minute, a guy who shows up 3.5 years later. And Hilda McPhee starts out in her statement, the motorcycle was 5 to 6 feet past the police officer when he shot. On direct examination, when they asked him the question, it was exactly even with the police officer when he shot. If you saw redirect examination, this was the, we have direct the prosecutor, I get to cross-examine, then they have redirect examination. They had her place the motorcycle again right in front of you, and it was put in front of William Lozano. She has him behind him, to the side of him, and the front of him, all at the same time. If you went to a used car lot and you found the salesman had turned the odometer back, would you trust what that salesman has to tell you? If you come into this courtroom and you find they keep moving the motorcycle back, are you going to trust what they tell you? Take someone like Mr. Fountain. Mr. Fountain says, and I know they try to gloss over this, at the time of the shooting there's 2 police cars there. One being driven by Officer Lozano and one being driven by Officer Campbell. They're not in the same car, they're in 2 different cars. And then a sergeant comes over. Now they try to say, I remember Mr. Bagley saying, well, remember Officer Carr said, well, there may be sergeants at the mini station. Well, that's not what Mr. Fountain said. He said a sergeant came and parked his car with the other 2 cars. The sergeant got out and talked to the officers on the sidewalk. That's his testimony.
We're looking at Officer Don Campbell there, who was Officer Lozano's partner in that car.
Sergeant, but he gives us a description of him. He's able to describe about how tall he is, that he's thin, and he's got stripes on his arm. He's able to make that up, because we know it never happened. I don't know what it is about this case. It's all right for people to make up evidence. And then we talk about any pressure or threats. Another consideration here. Well, you heard Detective Meir. He said that he was threatened by Mr. Havens, who works for Mr. Bagley and Mr. Hogan. I remember Mr. Bagley's response to that when he got up on redirect examination. Well, it wasn't me who did it, was it? And it wasn't Mr. Hogan who did it. You notice how they stopped right there. That makes it okay because they themselves didn't do it. And then look what they did with Officer Delancey. Officer Delancey and Officer Lozano are about half a block away from the police car, down south of 16th Street on 3rd Avenue. And Officer Delancey asked Officer Lozano, well, where did the shooting occur? And he said he does like this, which would be towards the police car. Delancey testifies this gesture meant the rear of the police car. From half a block away, they get him to say, this means the rear of the police car. Does that show you how far they're willing to go in this case? And then we just heard about Mr. Fountain's 1976 green Suburban apparently has now appeared. Mr. Bagley points out to you on this photograph, State's Exhibit 5, that this vehicle right here is a 1976 green Suburban that Mr. Fountain described as his own. We have a much better picture of it here on Defendant's Exhibit 19. There's only one problem for Mr. Bagley. That is a red Chevrolet pickup truck with a camper top on it. You can take a look at this photograph and you'll get to see it in the jury room. You can see all these photographs, ladies and gentlemen, when you go back. And he said that his car was parked behind the blue Nissan, this Chevrolet Suburban, 1976 green, is parked behind this blue Nissan truck. And he said there had been one car in front, then his was behind it. Well, where is it? Here is the photographs right here showing the rear of the blue Nissan truck. You can look at Defendant's Exhibit 20, 29, and 28. when you get back into the jury room. But that's not the real important part of this. These photographs were in evidence. Mr. Fountain was sitting right on that stand. Do you think for 1 minute that if Mr. Fountain would say that was his Chevrolet Suburban, that they wouldn't have shown him these photographs and have him pointed out? Not only that, but take a look at this one. In Defendant's Exhibit 19, you can even see the vanity license plate it has in front. You don't tell me that they wouldn't be having blown up pictures of the front of Mr. Fountain's car to match up with this photograph if, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, this was his car. Do you think these people sitting over here would miss this? Miss this opportunity? But it gets worse than that. These photographs were shown to Mr. Fountain at his deposition. Remember, we had a stipulation that had been read by the court. Judge Spencer announced it to you. During his deposition, every one of these photographs, this one here, these photographs, and 114 photographs were shown to Mr. Fountain. He looked at every one in their office while we were present. And he said that his Suburban wasn't shown in any of those photographs. He came up with some story, well, I must have left beforehand. But then, of course, we found his picture in there. And a stipulation was entered into. A stipulation that his Suburban was not in these photographs. A stipulation is the word of the lawyers involved that that happens to be the truth. Is it worth compromising your integrity? Is it so important to send this man to the penitentiary that you're even to go back on your own word? Is it so meaningless to agree that this is the truth, that his Suburban is not there? You're willing, in order to win this case, at any cost, you're willing to come in here and violate your own word? Is that what this case has come to? Is that how bad this case is? They're so desperate to send this man to the penitentiary, they're even compromise their integrity and go back on their word. If they can turn a red Chevrolet pickup truck with a camper into a 1976 green Suburban, well, then they can turn any evidence in this case inside out, upside down, on its head, any way they want. But my God, we can't run a system of justice like this. We can't play with people's lives like this. This is not some game to win or lose. We're talking about lives and the balance here. It's a lot more important than whether the lawyers win or lose this case. The principles of law mean a lot more than this. As the court will tell you, if there are conflicts in the evidence, it's reasonable doubt. If you have doubts about the credibility of this evidence that's been presented to you here, that's reasonable doubt. And if one of our police officers is not entitled to the benefit of the doubt, then I don't know who is. Hilda McPhee testified for the state. She originally said that the motorcycle was 5 to 6 feet past William Lozano when he shot them. She said that he walked east, in her statement, directly towards the apartment building. And I read to her statement about walking east, because she said he walked south. And I read the statement where she said he walked east. And I said, well, what about this? She said, well, I can't tell directions. Now, of course, I hadn't read the next question and answer, in which They asked the question, he said, well, he was coming right towards me, which of course was directly east. But now she comes in and says that she can't tell directions. A woman who drives a school bus for a living can't tell directions because it would be inconvenient for them to show that Officer Lozano was walking east instead of south, according to her statement. In her deposition, she said cars were parked on the street in the northbound lane. In her testimony in this court, those cars disappeared. In her deposition, under oath, she said there was traffic going north and south. In this trial, the traffic disappeared. We know about the acute angle she was looking at. She is way back here in this apartment building looking across the street. She said in her sworn statement before the trial, because of the angle she was at, she couldn't tell whether or not the motorcycle was heading towards the police officer. And that's the truth. But no, that had to be changed for this case. And now she's able to locate where the motorcycle is on that street. She said in her statement to the police and to the prosecutors, a statement made under oath right after this happened, when the police officer went out in the street, his hands were at his side. Now she goes like this. But when she gave that statement, his hands were at his side. She said in her sworn statement, this event happened so quickly, I didn't even have time to think. And that's a pretty accurate description. If you're sitting back in this building, and there are two wings of this building going out, I think the diagram shows about a 70 or 80 foot difference between the two wings. That motorcycle would go at 70 feet, would go there in about 3/4 of a second at 70 miles an hour. Even at 50 miles an hour, it would go that distance in less than a second. She met with the prosecutors on direct examination several times. Back in a statement she gave in 1990, she went there 20 to 30 times. And if you saw that motorcycle, it started from past William Lozano to even with him to in front of him. By the time, if we retry this case next year, that motorcycle will be somewhere down on 14th Street. A year afterwards, it'll end up in Key West. 20 or 30 times, inch by inch, that motorcycle keeps changing direction, distance, and is in reverse. Lonnie Vickers is a gentleman who is a longshoreman. He said that he went to the new lounge and he was there for about 30 to 35 minutes. My recollection is, he said he had 2 or 3 Heinekens when he testified. Mr. Bagley says today 1 or 2 beers. In his sworn statement, he says, and we have a drawing of this, I know, was done during his testimony. You can look at it in the jury room. He says the 2 officers and Mr. Johnson were standing at the grill of the car. The 3 of them moved backward to where the driver's door of the car was. When the motorcycle came, Officer Campbell walks to the front of the car and squats down. William Lozano goes backwards and shoots. Backwards. He said that William Lozano never even walked into the street. He does say that he heard the motorcycle rev up. He says it happens after the shot. Well, we know that couldn't have happened after the shot. I suppose if what Dr. Fogarty said was true, it was just coasting anyway. But he says the motorcycle revs up. I think you could tell that that rev up probably happened before the shot was fired. It couldn't have happened afterwards. He also tells us about the car at the New Lounge. In his previous statement, he said, and he's standing at, it says at the New Lounge, and the street is here. He said there's a cars parked at the curb, and then there was another car in the roadway, blocking the roadway. The motorcycle came up, swerved around that car, and hit a car in the southbound lane of traffic, and that's why there was the accident. Now, of course, we know that that couldn't be true, because according to the medical examiner, Mr. Lloyd did not have the ability to drive that motorcycle after the shot. And in fact, I even read something to him, and he said, well, Mr. Black, are you telling me that this man who's been shot now can drive the motorcycle? Obviously, somebody has cued him in on that. But in his sworn statement, he says that's how the motorcycle gets in the southbound lane. There's just no way that that could have occurred. He also is one of those witnesses who said he could see down to 14th Street at the intersection. And it was Mr. Vickers and Mr. Fountain. Both said they saw the motorcycle go through the intersection at 14th Street. They both say that the motorcycle, of course, was in the northbound lane the whole way. Well, we know it was not, that it was in the southbound lane, at the very least, down at 14th Street, because Officer Mervolian was right behind it. And Officer Mervolian went in the southbound lane of traffic. So we know that both of them who say they saw it down there simply could not be true. Now, Mr. Bagley manfully did everything he could to get Mr. Vickers to say he couldn't really see down to 14th Street. But if you remember, Mr. Vickers said, oh no, there was no problem seeing down to 14th Street. There was no problem with that motorcycle going in the northbound lane. Well, that simply can't be true. Once again, if there's a conflict in the evidence between what you know is true and what the witness says, then that's reasonable doubt. When the reporter wrote down what Mr. Vickers said, he said that the officer shot the man in the face. Let me take a look at Mr. Fountain's testimony. Of course, the real question with Mr. Fountain is, did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which he testified? I think that you could find that Mr. Fountain probably was not there, that his Suburban was not there, and that 3.5 years later, he now has information. We know that this thing about the 2 police cars being there nose to nose at the time of the shooting is incorrect. We know this about a sergeant arriving, no matter how much they want to tell you that a phantom sergeant showed up that nobody saw. We know that didn't occur. We know when Mr. Fountain said that that Officer Lozano put his radio in the trunk of the car, simply can't be true, because we hear Officer Lozano on the radio only seconds after the shooting. Mr. Fountain said that Officer Lozano unsnapped his holster and drew his weapon while standing at the trunk of the car. He said that the man with him, who identified as a black male, backed up a couple of steps when the officer pulled out his gun from the holster. Now, I don't know if you remember this, I asked Mr. Johnson about this. I said, well, when you were standing at the car there with Officer Lozano and he put down his radio, did he unholster his gun? And he laughed at me and says, are you trying to get me to say that? You know that's not true. Eddie Johnson made it clear that that never happened. Officer Lozano had his radio. He walked out, put the radio on his belt, and walked into the street. Eddie Johnson tells you that William Lozano drew his weapon when the motorcycle was 45 to 50 feet in front of him. That's approximately 3/4 of a second or a second before it gets to him. That's when he drew his weapon. He originally said that the officer shot when the motorcycle had just got to the front of his police car. Of course, now he denies that and says it happened some other way. Of course, he said he never discussed the case with anyone. He goes to the new lounge at least 4 days a week for 4.5 years, and they never once discussed this case. The biggest thing that ever happened on 3rd Avenue, nobody in 1611, where everybody gossips and is nosy, has ever talked about the case. All the people who go to the new lounge, which is right there in the corner of 16th Terrace and 3rd Avenue, they never talked about the case. They never exchanged information. In 4.5 years, after going there almost every day, they never once talked about this case. Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Did Mr. Fountain, did he ever call anyone to tell him he was a witness? Did he call 911, go to the mini station, down to the headquarters building, tell any of the detectives, anyone that he was a witness? And then, in one of the stories, he made somewhat of a mistake. You know that the prosecutors want to say that William was in some type of a stance or a crouch. Now, we have people saying all kinds of different things about that on one of our charts. But the most unique was Mr. Fountain. He said that Officer Lozano got in a crouch at the back of the car and sort of duck walked into the street. And he got a little carried away with the storyline. We know from the testimony, and I think it's important to know how quickly or how fast this motorcycle would eat up ground. When you're talking about how far this was from Officer Lozano when he drew the weapon and when he fired. At 50 miles an hour, this motorcycle would go 73 feet per second. At 60 miles an hour, it would go 88 feet per second. At 70 miles an hour, it would go 103 feet a second. At 80 miles an hour, it would go 117 feet per second. The absolute minimum, you look at the, I don't have the chart up, even at 50 miles an hour, this motorcycle would travel 73 feet a second. When Eddie Johnson ducked, he said that motorcycle was just a blur and was 8 to 10 feet from William Lozano. Even at 50 miles an hour, we're talking about somewhere in the range of 1/10 of a second from him. Now let me talk about the motorcycle noise for a minute. Hilda McPhee testified, and I asked her about this. How long before the shooting did you hear the noise? She said it was 3 to 4 seconds. 3 to 4 seconds that you heard the noise until the shooting. We know that when the noise first starts, William Lozano is in the trunk of his car with the lid open, trying to raise someone on the radio. Somewhere after that, he goes to look in the street. When he goes out there, that noise that was 3 to 4 seconds away has to be 1 or 2 seconds from him. I mean, how much time did this man have to do something? I know that they're going to do everything in the world they can to tell you he had the luxury of time, that he had plenty of time to think, that there was no split-second decisions here. Because they know that nobody in these circumstances going out there and has half a second or 1 second to make a decision like that, you can't come in here and fault somebody trying to defend their life under those circumstances. So they're going to try to make this as long as possible. But you listen to the testimony. He had 1 or 2 seconds when he was out in that street, and bam, it's there. That's the problems that police officers have. See, things don't happen in plans. Things don't happen where you know what's going to happen. You may be in the midst of eating your lunch. You can be in the midst of doing something else. You can be on the radio doing it. It happens that fast. It comes right up. You've got to react. And these men and women are getting assaulted and injured and killed in the line of duty. And when their life is on the line, when they've got to make that split-second decision, we can't turn that into a crime. We can't say, well, let's step back for a minute and say, well, you know, you could have waited another 1/10 of a second. You could have done this. You had some other alternatives. You just don't have that on the street. Boy, that's great when you're in this courtroom. But when you're out on that street, when you have that second or half a second to make a decision, my God, you don't have the chance to think things through. You react like that. I remember when we had the jury selection, we had one juror who pulled a car out, and the next thing you know, the motorcycle hit him like that. Came out of nowhere. Never heard the noise. There's a man who was extremely careful. 5 o'clock in the morning, looks both ways. He inches out on the street, bam! It happens that quick. Joseph Davis, as I mentioned, had testified, who was the medical examiner for Dade County, a well-respected scientist, physician, pathologist, medical examiner. What he told us is that this was a rapidly occurring sequence of events with 2 bodies in motion. And not only 2 bodies in motion, but you have a head that's on a swivel and you have a gun that's in a wrist. He said the combinations, the number of combinations are extraordinary to try to figure out what happened. He says the angles are unreliable. He said, I could tell you what could not happen, but I can't, based on this evidence, tell you what did happen. I can tell you that this man was not shot from the back, that he was in the left front, that it was consistent with the motorcycle approaching Officer Lozano, that it was consistent with Mr. Lloyd bending over the handlebars. He could say that the officer was more to the left than to the right of the motorcycle. And if you take certain things, if you're like this, if a motorcycle is coming at you like this, if you're right-handed and you fire from the right side and this motorcycle comes like this, the bullet's going to come to the left front. There are also other things that can happen. The testimony is that Mr. Lloyd is bent over like this on the motorcycle. His visor is up. You know that from Mr. Borghi's testimony because he could not fit the dowel with the visor down. The visor is up. He's going 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. The wind is in his eyes. He's going to have to cock his head a little bit because of that. He also has a police officer chasing him. The motorcycles have rear view mirrors on each of the handlebars. If you're in the southbound lane, keeping an eye on what's happening, you take a quick look in your right-hand mirror to find out how close that officer is gaining on you down 3rd Avenue. The problem with all this, and I will admit it to you, we're here speculating. I could speculate all day long. They could speculate all day long. But because of the destruction of the evidence in this case, there's no way to determine the truth. There's no way scientifically to determine the truth. We can guess. We can speculate. We can be armchair quarterbacks all day long. but you can't guess a person into the penitentiary. It has to be based on evidence. And that evidence is lost and gone forever. I wanted to discuss Mr. Blanchard for a minute. The court is going to give you an instruction. It says, if you find that the killing of the party intended to be shot would have been excusable or justifiable, then you must find that the unintended killing of a bystander or a person in close proximity to the person intended to be hit was also justifiable. In this case, if you find that the shooting of Clement Lloyd would have been justifiable or excusable, then you must also find the killing of Alec Blanchard was excusable or justifiable. There's a common sense reason for that. If you have a right of self-defense, the fact there may be some other party that you're aware of or unaware of on that motorcycle does not mean that you should forfeit your life because of the passenger. If you had the right of self-defense, if you had the right to defend yourself, even if an unintended party is injured or killed, that is not a crime. And if you look at the evidence in this case, you know that Mr. Blanchard in some way joined in on Mr. Lloyd's venture. You know that Mr. Blanchard leaned forward and talked to Mr. Lloyd before they fled from Officer Mervolian. You know that he grabbed onto his seat and tucked his head in, as Officer Mervolian described it, knowing they were taking off. He also, obviously, is the one who gave the finger to Officer Mervolian. He made no efforts to get off the motorcycle. He had to know how hazardous this was. He had to know the risk of fleeing from the police. And one other thing that I think is important to remember, when Officer Mervolian was in his car and he looked through his rear view mirror to see the motorcycle coming up, when you see the motorcycle straight on, it's much harder to see if there are two people there. He said he didn't see a second person until the motorcycle went around him on the left, and then he could tell there were two people on the motorcycle. In any event, the case involving Mr. Blanchard is the same as that involving Mr. Lloyd because of the circumstances of this case. You know, people expect police officers to be in control of situations because that's, you know, they're out there on the street. We expect them to be able to control people and control situations and be in control of what happens out there. But from the very beginning of this incident, William Lozano had no control over what was happening. He had no control over Mr. Lloyd using cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol. He had no control over the joint decision of Mr. Blanchard and Mr. Lloyd to flee from Officer Mervolian. He had no control over the reckless, outrageous way that Mr. Lloyd drove that motorcycle. He had no control over Mr. Lloyd driving as fast as 70 miles per hour through those streets. He had no control over any of this. And if you take a look at the instruction, this is the definition of the manslaughter instruction. Ask yourself when you're looking at this, when you get back to when the judge reads it, when you get back there to look at it, who was it who was acting grossly and flagrantly that evening? Who was it who was in a course of conduct showing reckless disregard of human life? Who was it who was in control out there on that motorcycle? Who was it who showed a conscious indifference to the consequences? Was it William Lozano? Who was it who was acting wantonly recklessly, grossly fire if you're right-handed and you fire from the right side and this motorcycle comes like this, the bullet's going to come to the left front. There are also other things that can happen. The testimony is that Mr. Lloyd is bent over like this on the motorcycle. His visor is up. You know that from Mr. Borghi's testimony because he could not fit the dowel with the visor down. The visor is up. He's going 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. The wind is in his eyes. He's going to have to cock his head a little bit because of that. He also has a police officer chasing him. The motorcycles have rear view mirrors on each of the handlebars. If you're in the southbound lane, keeping an eye on what's happening, you take a quick look in your right-hand mirror to find out how close that officer is gaining on you down 3rd Avenue. The problem with all this, and I will admit it to you, we're here speculating. I could speculate all day long. They could speculate all day long. But because of the destruction of the evidence in this case, there's no way to determine the truth. There's no way scientifically to determine the truth. We can guess. We can speculate. We can be armchair quarterbacks all day long. But you can't guess a person into the penitentiary. It has to be based on evidence. And that evidence is lost and gone forever. I wanted to discuss Mr. Blanchard for a minute. The court is going to give you an instruction. It says, if you find that the killing of the party intended to be shot would have been excusable or justifiable, then you must find that the unintended killing of a bystander or a person in close proximity to the person intended to be hit was also justifiable. In this case, if you find that the shooting of Clement Lloyd would have been justifiable or excusable, then you must also find the killing of Alec Blanchard was excusable or justifiable. There's a common sense reason for that. If you have a right of self-defense, the fact there may be some other party that you're aware of or unaware of on that motorcycle does not mean that you should forfeit your life because of the passenger. If you had the right of self-defense, if you had the right to defend yourself, even if an unintended party is injured or killed, that is not a crime. And if you look at the evidence in this case, you know that Mr. Blanchard in some way joined in on Mr. Lloyd's venture. You know that Mr. Blanchard leaned forward and talked to Mr. Lloyd before they fled from Officer Mervolian. You know that he grabbed onto his seat and tucked his head in, as Officer Mervolian described it, knowing they were taking off. He also, obviously, is the one who gave the finger to Officer Mervolian. He made no efforts to get off the motorcycle. He had to know how hazardous this was. He had to know the risk of fleeing from the police. And one other thing that I think is important to remember, when Officer Mervolian was in his car and he looked through his rearview mirror to see the motorcycle coming up, when you see the motorcycle straight on, it's much harder to see if there are two people there. He said he didn't see a second person until the motorcycle went around him on the left, and then he could tell there were two people on the motorcycle. In any event, the case involving Mr. Blanchard is the same as that involving Mr. Lloyd because of the circumstances of this case. You know, people expect police officers to be in control of situations. because that's, they're out there on the street. We expect them to be able to control people and control situations and be in control of what happens out there. But from the very beginning of this incident, William Lozano had no control over what was happening. He had no control over Mr. Lloyd using cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol. He had no control over the joint decision of Mr. Blanchard and Mr. Lloyd to flee from Officer Mervolia. He had no control over the reckless, outrageous way that Mr. Lloyd drove that motorcycle. He had no control over Mr. Lloyd driving as fast as 70 miles per hour through those streets. He had no control over any of this. And if you take a look at the instruction, this is the definition of the manslaughter instruction. Ask yourself when you're looking at this, when you get back to when the judge reads it, when you get back there to look at it, who was it who was acting grossly and flagrantly that evening? Who was it who was in a course of conduct showing reckless disregard of human life? Who was it who was in control out there on that motorcycle? Who was it who showed a conscious indifference to the consequences? Was it William Lozano? Who was it who was acting wantonly, recklessly, grossly careless disregard of the safety and welfare of the public? Who was it? I mean, let's talk about this for a minute. Who was it out there who was wanton and reckless and had gross, careless disregard of the safety and welfare of the public? Who had an indifference to the rights of the other people in that community? Who was it who had an utter disregard for the safety of others? Was that William Lozano, the police officer out there trying to enforce the law, helping people? You have to ask yourself the question, who was it who was in control out there, who was acting wantonly, recklessly, indifferently, endangering people? Who was it who caused this? Today, it seems the criminal is right and the police officer is wrong. That's the Alice in Wonderland world that our police officers operate in today. If the demagogues and politicians succeed in making this a crime, well, God help us all. And I'll tell you something, crime is a risky business. And the riskiest business of all is trying to assault or kill a police officer. There may be those who say, well, that's unfair. It's unfair that people who act wantonly and recklessly and dangerously and endanger people's lives, it's unfair that they risk the consequences of their own actions. Somehow today, if a criminal commits a crime, it's society that's at fault. Not the criminal, society. Every law-abiding citizen. There are people who always want to put the blame on the police officer. Judge Spencer is also going to give you an instruction about police officers and how they have a right to act. A police officer need not retreat from making a lawful arrest because of threatened resistance. A police officer is justified in the use of any force that he reasonably believes necessary to defend himself from bodily harm. Why do we have rules like this? Well, police officers are different than you or I. We, as reasonable and prudent people, avoid confrontations. We don't, if there's a dangerous person in the street, we don't go out of our homes. If we know there's a dangerous situation, we don't go there. We keep away from it, because that's the reasonable and prudent thing to do. But police officers can't do that. Police officers are supposed to go out there and confront violent problems. They're supposed to go out there and do something, not hide from it. That's the difference between police officers and us. That's why they have laws like this. Police officers have to be able to go out and confront the problem. It only makes common sense. And I know they try to say that Mr. Lloyd wasn't committing any crimes that day, that he was just a little reckless, he wasn't really endangering people, he was willfully fleeing, he was assaulting a police officer, aggravated assault. Even Sergeant Stonebreaker put down in the use of control of force report that Mr. Lloyd was committing an aggravated assault. And William Lozano is interviewed right after this happens. He tells Sergeant Stonebreaker, "The motorcycle was heading towards me. I feared for my life. That's the only reason I fired. I fired in self-defense. The motorcycle was coming at me. I was afraid of being killed. I fired at the vehicle." He wasn't out there intending to kill somebody. He was out there defending himself. "I fired at the vehicle." That's what Sergeant Stonebreaker said. Stonebreaker testified, "My understanding was the motorcycle came right at him." Officer Lozano tells Detective Meir, "The motorcycle was going to run me over, was going to kill me. That's why I drew my gun and fired." And he described a jerking, twisting motion to the left, trying to get out of the way of this motorcycle. Major Gonzalez, "The motorcycle was coming at him. That's why he fired." Now, when they took these statements from William Lozano, they were in the middle of a riot. They were not taking formal statements. They're not taking notes. They're trying to get a basic idea of what was happening. Well, what happened? Why did you shoot your gun? Why did you discharge your weapon? Was it a glove? Did you use your service revolver? How many shots? Why did you do it? They're not doing reenactments in the middle of a riot. They're not taking a formal statement. That's why they're unable to place things on charts. They were trying to get a basic idea of what happened. And that basic idea was that motorcycle was coming at me. He was going to kill me. He was going to run me over. I fired at the vehicle to try to save my life. So they may tell you that William shot too quickly. But how long should a man wait for a motorcycle? The law says that a man can use deadly force to protect his own life, not from real danger. That's not what the law says. It says from the appearance of danger. And the jury has to understand the circumstances under which the person was acting. The question is, did he believe it? The question is not whether there's real danger, although there obviously was here. The question is, was there the appearance of danger? That self-defense instruction will tell you that under the circumstances that are there, if there was the appearance of danger, even if not real, a person has a right of self-defense. And that's always been the law. You don't have to experiment to find out if you're wrong. You don't have to wait until the motorcycle hits you and breaks your bones and leaves your blood in the street. You don't have to wait that long. You have a right to act upon appearances. If it appears to you that your life is in danger, you have the right to act in self-defense. That's what the law says. Even if the danger isn't real, if you think it is, if you think that motorcycle is going to run you over, you have the right to use deadly force to protect yourself. And so if you shot at that vehicle because you thought that it was going to run you over, then that's self-defense. That's what the law says. The judge will tell you, you must judge him by the circumstances by which he was surrounded at the time the force was used. I'll tell you what I think is one of the best pieces of evidence to show that William Lozano fired in self-defense. He had with him that day his issued service revolver. It's a Glock. It's a specialized weapon that has been developed and used by police all throughout the world. The police had found out years ago they were being outgunned on the street, and they went from their service revolvers to the Glock. Every police officer in the city of Miami is issued a Glock service revolver. They all have the same ammunition. This gun carries 18 rounds, 17 in the clip, 1 in the chamber. All you have to do is pull it and fire it. There's no safety to thumb off. You just pull that trigger and it fires. And you can pull that trigger as fast as you can. And I think Mr. Quirk said you can shoot all 18 rounds in less than 2 seconds. What did William Lozano do? It was one shot. Because when that motorcycle came at him, he shot once to protect his own life. When it went past him, he never shot again. One shot. Because that's when the threat was, that's when the danger was. There's only one shot. I think more than anything else shows he only fired in self-defense. A motorcycle has an incredible agility and ability to maneuver. If you are out in the middle of the street, and by the way, if you look where the witnesses place things, you'll see it's all over the place. If you are out here in this street and a motorcycle's coming at you, how do you know where it's going to go? How do you know which way they're going to turn? This has an incredible speed, incredible maneuverability. If you're stuck in the middle there, where do you go? It's easy to sit here in this courtroom and say he should have done one thing or another, but when you're out there on the street with this thing bearing down on you, where do you go? When you go back into the jury room, you can listen to that audio tape, where you can hear William coming over the air and describing what happened. You can hear his voice. And listen to what he says. Here's this man who they say is acting wantonly, carelessly. What's he do? He calls for help. He says it's an emergency. He asks to send the squad, or the special, which is a special investigator, ask for homicide. In every police shooting, they're required to ask for a homicide detective to come to investigate. Every time there is a shooting involving a police officer, he calls the dispatcher to send it, to send his supervisor, to send for help. Even after the trauma he's gone through that you can hear in his voice, he's still there asking for these things to be done. The problem with the audio tape is that we have no idea where anybody is at the time things happen on this tape. When Officer Mervolian gets on the tape, we don't know where he is on 3rd Avenue. When Officer Mervolian is talking to the dispatcher, we don't know where the motorcycle is on 3rd Avenue. And when William Lozano gets on the tape, we don't know where he is on 3rd Avenue. We don't know how long after the shooting he actually gets on the air, whether it's a second or 5 seconds or however long it may be. But one thing you can get out of that tape is you listen to this man's voice. and you know that he's been through a traumatic event. You know that from the tape, from Officer Mervolian's description of him, and what the other officers have said. I think that one thing that we can't ignore in this case, at times in the courtroom we ignore reality. Or let's be honest with ourselves. If we don't admit there's a lot of implications in this case involving politics and matters like that. You know that the mayor is out there at the scene. You know there was mob violence that night. You know the press has fanned the flames in this case. They're outside agitators. Well, it was 2,000 years ago that a man named Pontius Pilate washed his hands of a political problem by sacrificing an individual. I ask each one of you in this case for your commitment that you would not decide this case on politics or any outside influences or outside matters other than this evidence that you have in your own common sense. And each one of you gave your commitment on this. And I think that's really the most important thing that we discussed in the case. Because, you know, you can't sacrifice a human being for his life and his family's life for what some people think would be politically expedient. We just can't do that to people. And that's not the way we act in this democracy and hopefully in this system of justice. I met William Lozano over 4 years ago, and I've gotten to know him and members of his family who are here. Here's a man who went into service for his community, who tried to do good, tried to help people, who put on our uniform, wore the badge. He was not out there to hurt people. He was out there only to help people. And if this man can't get a fair trial, if this man's verdict is influenced by something other than the truth, then I don't think there's any real force to our Constitution. And I know that each one of you are people of integrity. That's why we picked you on this jury. I know that you've given your oath and your commitment to see that none of these things influence you in your verdict. And I know it's an easy thing to say and it's a lot harder to do. When we give our word, when we give our commitment, I think we should stand by it. And I think you ladies and gentlemen are people who stand by your word. It'd be easy to turn your back. It'd be easy to wash your hands of this case. It'd be easy to satisfy the mob. When we came into this courtroom, we said we were going to begin the calm, deliberate search for the truth and not base this case on some type of prejudice or politics. And I just hope that we don't do that. And I'm going to ask each one of you to stand to your commitments that you made. And I know you know how this case has been permeated with political problems. There's going to be one instruction, I think, that you ought to be aware of. It's called aggravation of a felony by carrying a firearm. And that you could find, or the state is asking in the charges, that William Lozano be punished for carrying a weapon that day. Because we passed a law many years ago that criminals who have guns should receive extra punishment. Ironically, they're now using that against one of our own police officers. That's how bad this case has gotten. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know that I have exhausted your patience today, that throughout this case you've been so attentive, and I appreciate greatly your listening to me today. I know it's not easy sitting there for so long doing that. But at the end, I wanted to say one more thing to you. I wanted to speak as a police officer would speak to you. To let a police officer speak to you from his heart. Working the streets for you and knowing the truth took its toll on me. I had the same problems many cops did.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Ask for a sidebar.
All right, sidebar.
Working the streets for you and knowing the truth took its toll on me. I had the same problem many cops did. I believed in what I was doing. I would go out at night in my marked cruiser. I'd have a radio so I could receive and hear you when you called for help. When it was happening, you didn't call an attorney, a judge, or a prosecutor. You called me. I had a flashlight, the better to see you with. I had a gun, because that's what the world has come to. I went out looking for those who would steal from you or hurt you. You slept, and just outside your bedroom window were people who would violate your wife. They would steal your little girl and leave her body in a canal. They would smash their way into your business where you would work so hard to make a living and take your tools. They would go into your house, your castle, your sanctum. And after they took what they wanted and smashed the rest, they would defecate on your kitchen floor. Who was out there to stop them? Me. When you were afraid, I felt fear. When you cried out, I felt the pain. When you bled, I cried. I stood in your living room and felt your loss. Your color TV, your mother's ring, your daughter, she was only 17. When you were violated, I was violated. When you were dying on the hard pavement, I knelt over you to keep the sun from your eyes. I wore your powerful tin badge on my chest, and it gave me reason. I took up your sword and hurled myself against those who would hurt you. Everything I did for you. And I did only what I thought was right. I was there when you needed me. Will you be there when I need you? Thank you.
The court will be recessed for about 10 minutes.
25.